Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Center for Turkey Studies, I would like to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining this evening's talk. I just would like to give little information about CEFTUS, Center for Turkey Studies, and as an independent and non-partisan organization based in London. And CEFTUS' mission is to build a bridge between the UK and Turkey and the region. CEFTUS provides an open forum from promoting expert opinions and debate focusing on Turkey and UK relations, foreign affairs, economic issues, and social developments in Turkey and the region. Today, we are going to talk. Does China's ongoing persecution of the Uyghurs amount to genocide, and what can the international community do about it? On his last day in office, the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said, "I believe this genocide is ongoing and that we are witnessing the systematic attempt to destroy Uyghurs by the Chinese party state." Though several Western governments have raised their concern about China's intensification of repression of Uyghurs and its western Xingyang region since 2014. This statement by the US, labeling the action a genocide, show a new determination that Chinese Uyghur policy will face greater international scrutiny in the future. This position has been maintained by the Biden administration. And this evening, we'll first highlight what's happening to the Uyghur and why it's amount to genocide. And we would like to start with Mrs. Rahima Mahmut. And I know her personally. She's a wonderful singer and also a human rights activist. And she's a translator of award-winning the poignant prison memoir, The Land Drenched in Tears. And she's a UK project director for the World Uyghur Congress. And we would like to start with the Rahima Mahmut.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Ilhan, for that wonderful introduction and organizing this very timely, important event. I was born in the city of Golja in the northwest of what I call East Turkestan, and China call it Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And I was brought up in a large religious family. So the persecution of the Uyghur people has a long history from my childhood until I left China in 2000. And I experienced and witnessed many, many different forms of persecution, especially the 1997 Golja massacre. That led to, for me to make decision to leave my country. And since I came to UK in 2000, I was unable to return home. And because of my activism against the Chinese government in support of my people. And the last time I spoke to my brother was in January 2017. And at that time, he told me, leave us in God's hands. So it has been for almost over 4 years now. I don't know what happened to any of my siblings, my friends, anyone. Simply, I don't have any information. And so what is happening at the moment is, as Ilhan already mentioned, how the US government, also Canadian Parliament voted overwhelmingly with 266 against 0. The motion was as genocide. And the Essex Court Chamber report also the finding is the credible evidence crime against humanity and genocide is taking place. And the latest report by the New Line Institute, again, it confirmed that genocide is taking place. As Uyghur myself, I lived in that country, and after left that country and are still suffering from this persecution. With my work as an interpreter, translator, I have this first-hand accounts of suffering in this notorious 21st century concentration camps, as well as the heart-wrenching tales of mothers and fathers who have lost their children, young and old. And every Uyghur family, if you speak to, you will find the tragic stories. What is most painful is many people don't even dare to speak about it because of fear, because they fear that if they told the world that the other family members in China will suffer. And so this is the situation. At the moment, we believe up to 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities are locked up in concentration camps, or so-called, the Chinese called re-education camps. We know 500,000 and maybe more, maybe far more than that. That's a number from the expert report that transported to work as slave in cotton fields. Hundreds and thousands more forced to work in factories and built inside or alongside the camps. 1 million Uyghur children stolen from their parents and taken to secure boarding schools, they call it. It's children's camps. They are not allowed to be visited by their extended other family members. They are completely deprived from speaking the language and practicing the culture and tradition. So basically, Chinese government want the future generation of Uyghurs completely become Han Chinese. And 6,000 mosques, this is all according to the research record, demolished, hundreds of Muslim graveyards destroyed, millions of women facing forced sterilization, forced abortion, forced marriage to Han Chinese men. And one of the camp survivor, Gulbahar Khaitwaji, and she testified, and that her story was published on Guardian. And this is what she said: they had tortured my body and brought my mind to the edge of madness. Women like me who emerged from the camp are no longer who we once were. We are shadows, our souls are dead. And I worked on several, with reporters on several documentaries. And one of the documentary, Undercover Inside China's Digital Gulag, a Chinese official spoke to undercover reporter. And this is what he said. When the reporter asked him, don't you think that Uyghurs feel their human rights are being violated? And he said, it is not about violating their human rights. They simply just don't have human rights. And another Chinese official said, we need to build a lot of mental hospitals. When these people are released from these camps, they need first to be placed in mental hospitals. So this is a situation at the moment. It's ongoing, and we don't know what happened to all those millions of people. Chinese government keeping it complete, everything complete secrecy. And people like myself, I cannot even call my family. They cannot reach out to me. So I think I should stop here, and I will be very happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very actually the frustrated stories, and as said, the genocide ongoing there. We have Michael Polak, is a barrister practicing in human rights, and also he is on advisory committee of the World Uyghur Congress, London office. I would like to ask Mr. Polak to, as a lawyer and barrister, regarding what is going on in this region, and we can consider that this genocide on making in the region.
Thank you very much, Ilhan. I've got a very short slideshow. I think it's hopefully be interesting for people who are watching. Thank you very much for Seftas for organizing today's event. It's fantastic to have you all along, and great speakers that you've brought together. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will just share the slideshow now. So just a little bit about myself, and the only reason I'm talking about myself is because those watching might like to get involved with some of these organizations. I chair Lawyers for Uyghur Rights. It's a voluntary group of lawyers from different jurisdictions getting together to look at strategies to counter the mass repression of the Uyghur people. Rahima rightly says about the other Turkish people as well. You've got Tajiks, Kazakhs, as well as other minorities in the region who are suffering this intense repression. So please, if you're a lawyer and you're interested in getting involved, please send us an email, and we'd love to have you along. I do work for the World Uyghur Congress in regards to the Olympics quite recently, and other international law work with them. I'm part of the London committee, strongly led by Rahima, and it's fantastic and moving to hear her speak again today. So please have a look at Stop Uyghur Genocide, the website as well. I also run an organization called Justice Abroad, and we have clients who are from the Uyghur diaspora whose family members have been disappeared or sentenced to these long prison sentences, which are arbitrary prison sentences for no proper reason at all, just because they're Uyghurs and they have family members abroad. So here are some pictures of my clients. I pop them up just quickly to really demonstrate how the repression touches all parts of Uyghur society. It's not just one part of society. EventVideo and Enver are two clients. There's the Hemdul brothers, whose brother I'm speaking to here in Istanbul, down the bottom picture, and they're the biggest. They were some of the biggest business people in the region, and Esterson and Enver were shopkeepers. So really, all parts of society are affected. In the top picture here is the whole family of Radio Free Asia journalists, Nursa Mangal and her sister Nur. Their whole family has been sentenced to very long prison sentences. You might know, for those from Turkish background, you may know of Nursa Mangal because she spoke in Turkish Parliament recently about what's happened to her family, which was quite moving. Unfortunately, Turkish Parliament TV cut her off and decided not to show what she was saying, and then she was abused by some shocking comments by some commentators in Turkey. But she's been very brave and very strong about it. So please have a Google of Nursa Mangal. She'll come up. She's representing trying to get her family out of these prisons. It's a very sad position. So it does affect people from all parts of society. Abdullah Mahmut, down the bottom, is 71 years old. He's retired head of Xingyang Forestry Department. So it really does touch on all areas of society. I've got here what's happening to the Uyghur people, and you've probably heard about this: mass arbitrary detention, torture, forced labor. Today, we're focusing mostly on genocide, so I won't spend too much on the other things, but it really is a litany of oppression, of oppressive acts. The camps are very interesting in regards to the Chinese government not denying they existed, and then now accepting their existence and saying they're educational facilities, which makes you really worried about what's actually going on. In regards to actual crimes, the international crimes, the two main ones we're looking at are crimes against humanity and genocide. Today, of course, we're dealing mostly with genocide, crimes against humanity. You've got a definition there. Of course, crimes against humanity are obviously terrible crimes prohibited by international law as well. Here's a definition of genocide from the Genocide Convention. And what we're really looking at, and the New Lines Institute report, which I'll come to in a moment. I know Rahima mentioned that, which is fantastic. It's really well written, very detailed. So I'd invite people to go and have a look for that as well. I'll, when I'm not speaking, I'll post a link to it so you can download it. A really good piece of work, amongst other really good pieces of work on this. That report talks about all these types of genocide. So killing members of the group, causing seriously bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So they look at all those different types. Other reports have focused more on the forced transfer of children and the measures to prevent births. And we're talking about forced abortion and sterilization. In regards to genocide, the first kind of evidence of genocide emerging came from the work of Dr. Adrian Zenz. He looked at lots of the population figures. And the Chinese government keep on saying, well, how can it be genocide? The population in the region is growing larger, but the population of Uyghur people in the region is really going down, and that's what we really should be concentrating on. He looks at, he says this, that the Chinese government applying a force, so they used population control measures to decrease minority population. So that's where it first started being mentioned. There's a video here. I'm not sure if I have time to play it for you. Rahima actually the translation here, but it's a doctor who's worked in the region who talked about the forced sterilization and abortions that she carried out. So ITV News, it's a very powerful piece. Rahima did the translation. So please go and have a look for that. You'll find that online. I don't want to take up too much time because I think it's important that we answer questions as well. But please do have a look at that. Other evidence of genocide. So it's not just Dr. Adrian Zen's report. The BBC quite recently did a report which showed systematic rape and torture within these camps. It was a very powerful piece with first-hand testimony from those who've escaped. Essex Court Chambers did an opinion as well, which is a very, very strong piece of work, and says that there is a credible case of crimes against humanity and genocide, and they focused on the deliberate infliction of harm on Uyghurs in detention, measures to prevent birth, sterilization and abortion, as I've mentioned already, and the forcible transfer of Uyghur children out of their community. And we all would have seen the shocking videos of Uyghur children being removed from their families and put into state institutions where they have to swear allegiance to the Chinese state and forget about their identity. The New Lines Institute Strategy and Policy document, again, I mentioned it again, it's called the Uyghur Genocide, an examination of China's breaches of the 1948 Genocide Convention. It's a very strong piece of work as well. I'll post a link to it. It's very long, it's very detailed, and it really does look at all the evidence and come to a conclusion that a genocide is taking place in the region. Rahima mentioned the Canadian Parliament. The Dutch Parliament has also passed a resolution in regards to genocide, and I believe there's a resolution in the Belgian Parliament which will be voted on very soon. So hopefully Belgium comes along as well. You'll be asking the question about what's happening in the UK. Why aren't we leading on this? And I think we have the political speakers later will tell you more about that and why the UK should be doing more. In regards to fora, what can we do? We know this is happening. We've got evidence that this is happening. What can we do about it? And someone popped up on Twitter the other day, shared something about the Uyghurs and said, you know, if you really had evidence, if you really had a case, you'd bring it before a court. And it was one of the most ridiculous kind of objections I've had recently, because we'd love to get before any kind of court. We take the opportunity to bring the case there. The International Court of Justice is for state responsibility for genocide, although China has a reservation to the Genocide Convention. There is a possibility here in regards to the International Court of Justice, which I think is quite interesting. If the General Assembly votes for an advisory opinion, then the International Court of Justice could give an advisory opinion on crimes against humanity and genocide. And some of you may be thinking, well, will you get a majority of the General Assembly? And the numbers actually slowly moving, or they were, away from China's kind of position on this. So it's possible. But even someone standing up like the United Kingdom and calling for a General Assembly resolution, I think would have quite some effect. The International Criminal Court, China's not a member, unfortunately, although there's been some work to try to get the International Criminal Court to have jurisdiction. The Genocide Amendment gives us this really good opportunity. This is why it's so important. I don't want to speak on this because I know Matthew Turner is going to speak about this, and the other speakers, I'm sure, will speak about this as well. The reason why it's important is because of some of these other international bodies are closed off to the Uyghur people. There's a Jeffrey Nice QC tribunal, which is going to start this summer in London as well. That should be a very useful forum as well. Ad hoc tribunals are tribunals that the General Assembly could set up if it was minded to do so. And this is where it becomes political as well, because the UK at one stage looked like it was going to lead with our global human rights sanctions regulations, which it's a fantastic piece of legislation which allows the UK to apply what's commonly known as Magnitsky Sanctions against human rights abusers around the world. And you can find the list online, and some very interesting people from a wide range of places around the world, from South America to Asia, all over the place, Belarus, people from everywhere. There's this huge gaping hole in our sanctions list because there are none of the regional leaders who are committing these international crimes. And it's becoming slightly embarrassing that they're not there, and something needs to be done about that. I think I'm almost up to my 7 minutes. I wanted to speak a little bit about the Olympics. When these states are recognizing that genocide is taking place, it's going to be a difficult argument for them to say, yes, it's taking place, but we want to send our Olympic team to Beijing for 2022. So I think that's something which needs to be raised, and it may become a bit embarrassing for teams to go out there. So that's something, I think that's an area where more work can be done about what's going to happen with the Olympics. Will athletes be able to speak freely when they're there? Will media houses be arrested when they actually try to report it? We know the BBC is now banned from China. So I think that's very important to see what's happening there. There are a number of Western sponsors of the Beijing 2022 Olympics. Should they really be sponsoring this event? And we made a complaint to the World Uyghur Congress in regards to the Olympics to the Ethics Commission of the IOC. The IOC does have an Ethics Commission, which is supposed to be separate from its executive, but it didn't end up working like that. And they simply referred back to what the executive committee had been saying. But we're trying to draw as much attention to these Olympics as possible. That companies who get involved are tarnishing their own images. And one point in regards to the Olympics, it's not simply the propaganda feature of China hosting the Winter Olympics. It goes further than that. When athletes cross the finishing line, the technology being used will be the same technology being used to facially map, to track, to imprison Uyghurs in the region. So I think that's a very important point. It's not just about propaganda. The clothing and souvenirs will be very likely made by Uyghurs transported thousands of miles across China and working in slave-like conditions. So there'll be, in my submission to you, direct participation by the Olympic movement in these international crimes. It's not just the propaganda goal of it. Of course, the G7 is coming up as well in Cornwall, and we have a fantastic opportunity as the United Kingdom to really raise this issue, to get a resolution at the G7. And I've looked at the countries who are attending. There's of course 10 of them now, because there's the invited guests, Japan, Australia, and South Korea. And quite a few of those countries are supportive of the Uyghur cause. So it really is the chance for the UK to stand up and be counted in regards to this issue. So I thank you very much. I know I've spoken very quickly to you. I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end, and please do get involved. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Polak. Thank you for presenting us. This is a great contribution of a wide effort by the Chinese government to raise Uyghurs and the other ethnic minorities' culture and identity. I would like to ask Mr. Kinnock, the Member of Parliament, and what is the UK responsibility to act regarding this crime against humanity, and what need the UK government to tackle against this crime?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ilhan, and it's a real honour to be invited to speak this evening, and always great to be working with my good friend Ibrahim Dolush, who I think is on the call this evening. I'd like to start by saying that it's absolutely clear that the oppression of and persecution of the Uyghur people is a scar on the conscience of the world. The Labour Party is absolutely clear that we must stand shoulder to shoulder with the Uyghur people, indeed with the Chinese people more broadly. Our quarrel is not with the people of China. It is with the behavior, increasingly aggressive and belligerent and expansionist behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. And that is something that we need to be very clear about and very focused on. There's no doubt that there are crimes being committed in Xinjiang for reasons that have been very well and clearly set out. I won't go back over all the evidence that's been received. One item I would add to the list, of course, is the unforgettable interview on the Andrew Marr program with the Chinese ambassador, who was shown the video of the shaven-headed men clearly being taken to some form of labor camp or so-called re-education camp, and just sort of sitting there and denying it and saying it's fake news. And I think this really does show that we're in this kind of age of impunity, where authoritarian states are increasingly able to behave as they wish, to violate human rights, and to just get away with it scot-free. And this is something that we cannot allow to continue to happen. And who can forget as well the incredibly powerful testimony that we've heard from Holocaust survivors who've been speaking out in advance of the trade bill amendment, the genocide amendment, coming to both the Lords and the Commons, and imploring the Prime Minister and the government to accept the amendment, and saying we must never allow genocide to happen again. And there have been too many genocides. The last time we successfully prosecuted a genocide was the Nuremberg trials. Since then, we've had Bosnia, we've had Rwanda, we've had Cambodia, and it surely has to come to a point where we say, no more. We will not accept this happening. The international community must step up, must learn the lessons of history. The challenge, of course, from a political point of view, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to, Michael has so eloquently set out the legal position, but there is a deeply problematic political position, which is that the international institutions are paralyzed. They are paralyzed by the veto in the UN Security Council that is wielded by China and Russia. And China has also become extremely adept at building alliances across the United Nations and other international institutions, using its Belt and Road Initiative to create a kind of debt trap diplomacy, whereby in exchange for getting loans from the vast resources that China is able to mobilize, you keep your mouth shut and you support the Chinese position. And that is enabling it to block the system. And so that leaves us really deciding, are we just going to throw our hands up in exasperation and allow the international system to be stymied in this way? Or are we actually going to seek ways of working through it and around it? Now, the position of the British government is that genocide is a matter for the courts, but they know that the international courts, the ICJ, the ICC, etc., are not usable in this context for the reasons that I've just set out. And so what I think is very positive about the Genocide Amendment is it says, well, we are actually going to stand up, take the right moral position and enable the UK, a panel of UK judges, essentially, to be brought into the process to make a recommendation to Parliament, which Parliament can then vote on. And that is absolutely the right way to go, because we can't just carry on accepting the paralysis that currently is affecting the International Court of Justice, the ICC, and the United Nations. A brief word about the more sort of broader political strategy in terms of how to deal with China. Look, the Chinese Communist Party respects strength and unity and is contemptuous of weakness and division. So we have to do two things. We have to, first of all, reduce our dependence on China, and countries across the world have to do this. Far too many of our supply chains and our investment chains are dependent on China. So we need to build our own industrial strategy here at home. We need to have far more filters on investment that come in. The National Security and Investment Bill is a step in the right direction, but it's too little too late. And we then fundamentally have to be about building alliances. And I'm profoundly concerned about what's happened over the last 5 years or so, because the United Kingdom has gained a reputation of being an alliance breaker when we need to be an alliance maker. We have burned bridges with our European partners, and there's a real risk that we start to look isolated. So we've got to reduce our dependence on China, build alliances, stop being as naive and complacent as we've seen over the last 10 years, and certainly since President Xi came to power in 2013. Then specifically, Magnitsky sanctions, absolutely. It is embarrassing that not a single senior official of the Chinese Communist Party or the Hong Kong executive has been included on the Magnitsky sanctions. We need human rights due diligence in supply chains, so that we're stopping forced labor, stopping trading in products that have forced labor, and also with technology companies who are providing the surveillance equipment that is being used to oppress the Uyghur people. We must push much harder, stand up in the UN and demand access, unfettered access for the UN Commissioner for Human Rights to Xinjiang, so we can get a proper report on what is happening there. And we need to ensure that we're building a strategy, and a proper joined up strategy across government, because at the moment you've got number 10 and the Treasury basically pushing for a trade deal with China, other parts of government, and of course rebels in the Conservative Party asking for something else. It's divided, it looks weak, there's a gap between the words that are being used and the actual deeds that are being acted upon, and that weakness and division will always be exploited by the Chinese government. Thank you very much, Ilham. I'll hand back to the panel now. Thank you. You're on mute, Ilham.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all pointed out and what is need to be done by the UK. The second question need to be asked, is there any amendment need to be done to prevent human rights abuses regarding the trade bill? Mr. Matthew Turner, our speaker as well, and he is chair of Labour campaign for human rights, and his main areas focus on corporate supply and chains and economic, social, and cultural rights. And I would like to ask you, what can economical sanction can be done against stop these crimes against humanity?
Yeah, thank you, Ilham. That's the right question. What is the economic leverage we have? Now, I'm not going to be talking about the Genocide Amendment. Others cover that, but my focus is going to be on corporate supply chains, and that is timely. This is all timely, but the issue of corporate supply chains is timely because yesterday, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee published its report entitled Uyghur Forced Labor in Xingyang and UK Value Chains. And it's on exactly this issue. It goes without saying that I agree with what everyone has said about the persecution of the Uyghurs in Xingyang amounting to genocide. But a feature of that persecution, as Michael indicated in his slide, is forced labor, okay, modern slavery. That is not one of the 5 prohibited acts under the Genocide Convention, at least not directly. But it certainly is reminiscent of the Holocaust. In February 2020, so February of about a year ago, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is a well-regarded think tank in Australia, published a report called Uyghurs for Sale. And it was looking at the fact that millions of Uyghurs are going into these re-education camps and what is happening to them. And it was quite explosive because it revealed that a labor transfer scheme from Xingyang province and the re-education camps there to factories all around other parts of China. And they estimated that between 2017 and 2019, around 80,000 Uyghurs were transferred out of Xingyang and into factories around China. The terminology used in documents, that leaked documents that were translated, official documents, is really gross and harrowing. The groups of Uyghurs transferred are referred to as batches. The overall program is called the Xingyang Aid Program, and it describes the Uyghurs being forced to work in these factories as undergoing vocational training. And the worst part of the report was the number of massive international brands that were implicated as either directly or indirectly benefiting from this Uyghur forced labor. 82 major brands, including, I won't list them, you can see them all in the report, but Amazon, BMW, H&M, many, many others. That's what's happening outside of Xingyang province. But what about inside Xingyang province itself? I would urge everyone to go on the BBC website, if they haven't already, and look at an article called China's Tainted Cotton from December of last year, which is actually one of the triggers for the BBC now being kicked out of China or limited in China. It's really interactive and has videos and satellite imagery and information, but the satellite imagery is striking. It shows, it's open source satellite imagery from 2017 to 2020, showing, first of all, construction sites, then re-education camps with watchtowers, you know, perimeter fences, that sort of thing, are all being constructed. And then next to those re-education camps, factories start to appear and be built, and even shows the travel between the two of people all wearing the same uniform. It's so clear what's happening there, and that's why the headline article was China's Tainted Cotton. 84% of Chinese cotton comes from Xingyang province, and this is the worst statistic, perhaps. 20%, that amount accounts for 20% of global cotton production. So it's almost impossible, really, that any clothes, textiles being bought haven't in some way had cotton from Xingyang province that's tainted by slave labor inside it. There's evidence that forced labor is being used at all stages of the cotton manufacturing process, from the planting in the fields right through to the work in the factories. So much so that in October of last year, the Better Cotton Initiative, which is a global non-profit focused on cotton sustainability, it ceased all of its operations in Xingyang entirely and said, and I quote, it was just an untenable operating environment for them. Now, modern supply chains are obviously complex, fine. And it's easy to say companies should be terminating relationships with direct suppliers in Xingyang, fine. But the problem is lots of cotton goes from Xingyang to garment producing neighboring countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, elsewhere. And there it gets mixed with cotton from elsewhere, and all of that goes together to produce fabrics and textiles. But this argument shouldn't be overstated, right? Because multinational corporations are extremely powerful, extremely well-resourced, and there's now a real growing industry around supply chain auditing, third-party companies that can provide, professional input on this. And actually, new emerging technologies allow some really impressive tracing. So isotope analysis and DNA sourcing can actually allow you to take clothing and identify where the individual fibers are from. So I don't want to leave the impression that this is an insurmountable problem. It isn't. International companies could do a great deal. That's the landscape. Now, what is the legal situation here in the UK? What laws are in place to get companies to audit their supply chains in this way? At the moment, all we've got is the Modern Slavery Act 2015, which was passed 6 years ago. Now, Section 54 of that is really important, and it imposes an obligation on companies, large companies with a turnover of over 36 million, to publish a modern slavery statement on their website at a prominent place, setting out the steps that they're taking to prevent modern slavery. That section was brilliant and groundbreaking when it was passed 6 years ago. It was the first attempt to really formalize transparency in supply chains through law. And it's, in some sense, sowed the seeds for a healthy business and human rights culture. But it has massive, massive problems and is fundamentally out of date now. The first problem is all it does is require companies to say what they've been doing. It doesn't impose on them any obligations to actually do anything. And actually, a company would be entirely compliant with Section 54 by simply stating in their statement that they've taken absolutely no steps whatsoever. Also, at the moment, there's no monitoring of compliance by the government, and there are no sanctions for non-compliance, although this may change slightly. But the current situation is it's estimated that 40% of companies captured by the legislation are not complying with it at all. And of those that are, many just see it as a tick box exercise. I can't really put it better than the Bayes Committee did in their report yesterday. And I quote, they say, "The Modern Slavery Act is out of date, it has no teeth, and we do not accept that businesses should be excused from doing basic due diligence to guarantee that their supply chains are fully transparent and free from forced labor and slavery." Well, I entirely agree, and I'm sure all of us on this call will, which begs the question, what then is the solution if the modern slavery is out of date? Strengthening it, the government has some proposals to strengthen it. Now, those proposals have been a long time in the making and have come from an independent review, a government consultation. It's all being done by the Home Office, and it led to some updating proposals. Dominic Raab's statement in January in the House of Commons, pretending that these were sort of his ideas and this was coming from the Foreign Office, was entirely disingenuous. But I suppose that's aside. Strengthening the Modern Slavery Act is a good thing, but it doesn't go far enough. So the question is, what more can be done? the solution is, and some of you will have guessed it already, an obligation on companies to actually take steps to carry out due diligence of their supply chains, to identify human rights abuses, and then, if they identify them, to take steps to mitigate them. Now, that is called mandatory human rights due diligence, and it's not a new idea. It's not a particularly new idea, and it's not a concept that's unfamiliar to business. The concept of due diligence is very familiar to business, and the concept of mandatory human rights due diligence comes directly from the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were published in 2011, so a decade old now. And Principle 17 says, in order to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for how they address adverse human rights impacts, that means human rights abuses, business enterprises should carry out human rights due diligence. So what we need is an act translating that aspirational principle into hard law here in the UK. You could see it as a Human Rights Act, Modern Slavery Act 2.0 that actually has teeth and requires companies to do something. We would not be leading the way with this, because although we led the way with the Modern Slavery Act, we've quickly been overtaken by many other European nations now. The best example is in France. So since 2017, France has had in place a corporate duty of vigilance law to try to realize that principle from the UN Guiding Principles. This applies to the largest companies in France, and it requires them to implement what's called a vigilance plan. It's just a plan to as to how they map out their supply chains to identify human rights and environmental abuses. And this can be enforced. So if the plan is inadequate, or if the plan is adequate but it's not being effectively implemented by the company, any concerned party can file a complaint with the courts, and a judge can order the company to comply with its own plan or to improve its plan so that it's adequate. And even better, there's provision that if a company doesn't follow its plan, and that leads to human rights abuses in its supply chains, they can be held liable to those victims and have to pay in damages. So that's what's happening in France. I'm conscious of time. There are many other countries that are doing this, including Germany and the Netherlands, and it's also happening at EU level. So there may be there probably will be an EU-wide law on this by the end of this year. But I won't go into further details on that. I'll simply bring it all together by asking, so how would a law like that in the UK apply to the Uyghur genocide? And there are two parts to this, really. What if we'd had a law like this in place in 2015 when we passed the Modern Slavery Act? My suspicion is that if companies had been required to properly audit their supply chains for human rights abuses back then, they would have been the canaries in the coal mine. This sustained campaign of persecution against the Uyghurs began in 2016, and we might have had some pretty serious warning signals from businesses if they'd been required to carry out this kind of work, but we didn't. And really, the international community didn't properly wake up to what's happening in Xingyang until last year. And you know, the cynic might even say it was because of what happened in Hong Kong rather than anything else. So that's what would have happened then. But what would it mean for companies now if we had a law like this? Well, the UN Guiding Principles give further detail on this. But basically, if a company identifies human rights abuses in its supply chains, it needs to then take steps to mitigate them. Realistically, in China, in Xingyang, that's impossible. And so what the UN Guiding Principles say then is if you can't mitigate them, you need to cease those relationships, or terminate those relationships or cease those operations. And what it would mean now, a law like this, is that all of these companies that have tainted cotton, for example, or other connections to Xingyang, would need to cease their operations. And that leads to the question, is it reasonable for us to expect large companies operating in the UK to have to move their operations out of a country where there's credible evidence of genocide and where their supply chains are tainted by modern slavery? I think the answer is clear, but maybe we ask the question in a slightly different way. We look back at the Holocaust 80 years ago now through the 2020-2021 lens, and we know how critical that can be. So let's ask ourselves, in 80 years' time, when people are looking back at this period of history, what will they think companies operating in the UK and British politicians and the British government should have done to try to help the Uyghurs in Xingyang? And I think the answer is clear.
Thank you for pointing out, and thank you for saying the UK government must toughen the measures to tackle modern slavery, including more penalties to compel businesses to ensure Uyghur forced labor is not used in their supply chains. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Turner. Mrs. Emily Thornberry, Labour MP, and she has been served as a shadow cabinet Secretary of State International Trade, and Mrs. Thornberry is going to be our last speaker, and then we are going to go to Q&A session, and I believe Mr. Bill Esterson is going to join us in question and answer session, and I would like to kindly ask Mrs. Emily Thornberry regarding UK government, and also the questions asked in our chat session, what kind of international act can prevent these crimes against humanity in the region in China?
Thank you. And can I thank everybody at EFTAS and at LCHR for organising this discussion and for inviting me to take part in it. I did want to start my remarks this evening by mentioning a timely anniversary. 25 years ago this month, in March 1996, China was coming to the end of what, by any standards, was one of the biggest, most impressive and most expensive global lobbying campaigns in history. They weren't building some global coalition against poverty or climate change or terrorism or any of the other great scourges of modern times. They were building what was very literally a coalition for inaction. So let me explain. They were working in every continent around the world to ensure that when the 53 members of the UN Human Rights Commission came together in Geneva that spring, that they would vote for what was called a no-action motion, meaning that China's human rights record wouldn't even be the subject to a debate. A quarter of a century ago, they succeeded. Exactly 27 countries voted for the no-action motion, just enough to guarantee it wouldn't pass. And that was a total reversal of what had happened the year before, because back then, in March 1995, the no-action motion was defeated. And for the very first time, not only was China's human rights record formally debated, but a motion to censor China for its human rights violations was defeated by only one vote. That was as close as the world has ever come to formally condemning China for its actions. Here's the thing. And the reason I mention the 25th anniversary of that global lobbying effort the following year, China didn't go away from that narrow scrape in 1995 and think, we better clean up our act, they went away instead and took a conscious and calculated decision that they would never let the vote get so close again. The Chinese premier, the Chinese president, and other senior Chinese leaders were dispatched around the world, or more specifically to countries sitting on the UN Human Rights Commission, offering aid packages, investment deals, multi-million-dollar loans, multi-billion-dollar contracts, memoranda of understanding, and of course, formal trade agreements. And all of that produced a situation when those countries went back to Geneva in 1996 and faced the no action vote again, where the question they asked themselves was not what will happen to China's people if I vote for no action, but instead it was what will happen to all that Chinese money if I don't. That's the truth. That was the lesson that China learned 25 years ago. That was the lesson the world learned. And that, I'm afraid, is the lesson that we've been stuck with ever since. And that's why I have to say that what Dominic Grab did a couple of days ago, he did us a huge favor. He did us a huge favor because what he did was that he gave us a gift. He gave us the gift of truth when it comes to China and trade and genocide. And frankly, that's a refreshing change, because I can't tell you what it's been like, you know, for Stephen and myself and all of us on the Labour benches to sit through the constant stream of excuses offered up by government ministers as to why they cannot support all the different versions of Lord Alton's genocide amendment that have come before the House of Commons in recent months. But thanks to the leaked remarks from Dominic Raab, plain, simple, unvarnished truth has now been heard. And frankly, it's the same truth that we've had for 25 years, which is that human rights don't matter to this lot. The Uyghurs don't matter. Even genocide doesn't matter. And if it means that it's going to get in the way of all that Chinese money. And that's the calculation of the Chinese government. That's what they've been relying on for 25 years to guarantee the inaction of the world. And that is the calculation that we heard this week directly from the mouth of the Foreign Secretary and, frankly, between the lines of the government's integrated review. And it's a calculation that we will hear again on Monday when the genocide amendment comes back again before the Commons in the trade bill, when the government will line up yet again to block that genocide amendment to the trade bill and ensure there is no possible impediment to a future trade deal and investment deal with China. So on the questions that are before us in our discussion tonight, yeah, it's overwhelmingly clear that what is happening to the Uyghurs is genocide. It's a systematic attempt to end the existence of the people, their culture, and their faith as a feature in China's life. What can the international community do about it? Well, we can avoid making it worse, which is why we must all speak up against any suggestion that Uyghur refugees in Turkey should be deported to China. We can punish some of the individuals responsible, which is why Stephen and I continue to urge the government to do what we've been calling for 2 years now and introduce Magnitsky sanctions against State Secretary Chen, as America did 8 months ago. But ultimately, we cannot exert real sustained pressure on the Chinese government to stop those genocidal acts and free the Uyghur people until the global calculation is changed. Until enough people and enough leaders in enough countries are prepared to say to the Chinese government that faced with crimes of this enormity, we cannot continue to make the calculation that you are counting on us to make, put our financial interest ahead of our conscience. That's what needs to change. And it can only change one country at a time, just like it did in the wrong direction at the Human Rights Commission meeting 25 years ago. That's why Monday's vote really matters, because it is our chance to make a decisive change as a country away from the financial calculations of Dominic Raab and back to the moral compass which Britain at its best has always believed in. I really hope Parliament will seize the initiative on Monday we will fight to make sure that that happens. I hope that we will win the vote for action. And I hope that we will send the right kind of signal to China about the rules and values that we stand for as a country and the kind of world that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Thornberry. And we would like to start Q&A session. And also one question need to be asked, as Mrs. Thornberry is pointed out in her speech regarding the Turkey responsibility regarding extradition treaty it's signed with China. Also, our participants ask these questions, and who would like to examine Turkey's responsibility in the light of extradition treaty it's signed with China. And also I think it has caused a lot of anxiety among Uyghur people, Uyghur refugees who lives in Turkey. Would you like to talk about this, Rahima Mahmut, regarding Turkey's stance against this crime against humanity? And also in Turkey, the Turkish people, they speak the same language with the Uyghurs, and they come from the same ethnicity, and they were expecting something more from Turkey. And I believe the Turkish government still is not providing what the Uyghur people really expect.
Okay, thank you for the question. And I must say, first of all, we Uyghurs always show our gratefulness to people who even offer us a cup of tea. What I am saying this is that when Uyghurs were returned from Thailand several years ago, and no other countries tried to help but Turkey. So Turkey did help the Uyghurs. That's why thousands, now we have 20, 30 thousands of Uyghurs are living in Turkey, many without any state, you know, without any kind of form of state. So first of all, I have to say, Uyghurs are still quite grateful that they at least, you know, as a large number, they cannot reach here. They cannot go to Europe. It's almost impossible. But Turkey is one of the countries that most of the Uyghurs living at the moment. Of course, this treaty is worrying and it's very disappointing. It's very hurtful for the Uyghurs because of this you know, blood relationship we feel. And I also know that the Turkish people in Turkey, they are very much in support of the Uyghur struggle. And there are other parties like E-Party, they've been raising this Uyghur issue very regularly. But, you know, in 2009, it was the first time Erdogan said genocide when July 5th Urumqi massacre happened. I remember so clearly, and within 1 month, I think he was forced to apologize to Chinese government. And then what the Chinese government did, I mean, Emily has earlier already explained what they do, how they try to go after these countries, and with all the kind of diplomatic and economic and deals, loans, and all this. So sadly, Turkey became very silent. It's very, very silent about the Uyghur situation. It's tragic. And when you look back, I think what my friend and advisor Matthew said, after 80 years, when people look back and they will judge, you know, what this country did to help Uyghurs, and history will judge Turkey as well. And at the moment, it is a very sensitive issue, sensitive things for the Uyghurs. In the meantime, Uyghurs are protected there. At the same time, people are feeling very worried about this treaty. So we are working, World Uyghur Congress is, we sent letters, and we have representatives in Turkey lobbying, you know, against this bill. And we are asking for the Turkish government to protect the Uyghurs in Turkey. But I have to accept a lot of Uyghurs in Turkey don't feel safe. That is the reality. Maybe Michael can say more on this as a lawyer.
In regards to Uyghurs in Turkey, the problem it's been identified that the Turkish government have been refouling Uyghur refugees. They're sending them back not directly to China, but through third-party states who are friendly with China, like Uzbekistan and places like that, which is very worrying to see that they're actually doing that. And many Uyghurs that I've spoken to who live in Turkey are worried about being sent back directly now that this extradition treaty seems to have been agreed, which is very worrying for them. Such a return could be challenged in the European Court of Human Rights, but we all know that the Turkish government doesn't particularly listen to the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, and we've seen that in really high-profile recent cases. So it's very worrying legally about what can you do to prevent Uyghurs being sent back to torture and crimes against humanity.
The only point I would add to that is that it's absolutely clear that we're seeing very little vocal opposition from Muslim majority countries to what is taking place in Xinjiang. And that is deeply disappointing, because I am absolutely sure that the Uyghur people would appreciate the solidarity of countries like Pakistan, of Turkey, of Indonesia. And the reality is the Belt and Road Initiative and other economic incentives and over-reliance on China has given China massive power and influence politically and diplomatically. And that just shows how naive and complacent the world has been. And we really do need to come together, both in terms of Muslim majority countries and democracies across the world, and actually wake up and smell the coffee and understand what is actually happening in the world. Because as things stand, you know, I think that what the Chinese government has realized is that it can slowly but surely come to take an extremely dominant position, both economically and politically, without a shot ever being fired. So this is not, you know, an old-fashioned security question. This is a security question for the 21st century.
Thank you very much. This was also the answer of one of the questions asked regarding the Muslim countries, and they don't show enough action against this cruelty and crime against humanity. And Mr. Bill Esterson, Labour MP, I recently seen his name. He joined this talk. And if you would like to answer this question as well, or another question.
I think I don't really have anything to add to what Stephen and Emily have said, to be honest. So I'll probably answer a different question, only to say, look, we absolutely have to put morality at the heart of our foreign and trade policy, and I think they've both made that point very, very strongly.
Thank you. And another question regarding the United Nations role and what can be done by United Nations, and also they are one of our guests asking about China is a member of the UN Security Council, and how we can do something, or any international intervention can be done under this UN Security Council's members. China is still the member in there. What can be done?
I think in the absence of anyone else answering this, I think that perhaps I can say this, is that we have to always remember that the United Nations is a reflection of international will. So we can't just say, what's the United Nations going to do about it? It's, what are we going to do about it? Because it's only ever as strong as we want it to be. The mandate that is given to the United Nations comes from the international community. The international community has to be clear about what it is that it wants to do. But as I said in my contribution, what we have at the moment is the Chinese government picking people off one by one. And I mean, I agree with Stephen. I think it's remarkable. I mean, I remember when Rahima and I spoke at a mosque on this issue 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And even then I was thinking, why isn't the Muslim community up around the world up in arms? And then I thought, I'm being naive here. And as Stephen has said, you know, it is about Belt and Road and about the influence of China. Now, you know, we have to make a decision as to what we're going to do. But, you know, I mean, we also can't expect, if we decide to take a stand, that the Chinese won't fight back. I mean, we've seen examples of the wolf warrior diplomacy in Australia, where Australia's exports are being stopped for all sorts of, frankly, spurious reasons. And, you know, they're being made an example of. And I think that it's very interesting and depressing that that Australia has found itself with so few friends prepared to stand with it when this is happening. But this is the challenge. I mean, there's no other point. We have to speak the truth here. You know, it means that, you know, if we believe in multilateralism, which we do, we believe that we should act together, which we do. And we believe that we should have foreign policy and that we should act in accordance with core values for us as a country. You know, when it comes to the human rights legislation, when it comes to the multilateral institutions, where have they come from? They have largely come from, you know, from British lawyers, largely over the years. And we have a place on the international stage, I think. And when we are acting at our best, we act in accordance with those core values, and we can have a leadership role multilaterally as a result. But unfortunately, Britain has been too preoccupied with Brexit and everything else, and looking at its navel and taking some fluff out of it, and intimidated by Trump and China, that we have not been doing the sorts of things that we do well.
I completely agree with what Emily said there, every word. And I think that part of the answer to the question about what to do about the paralysis in the international institutions is that I think the international community is going to have to get creative. It's going to have to think of ways and means, because we just can't carry on throwing up our hands in the air and saying we're exasperated, but we can't do anything because everything gets vetoed by China and Russia. We just simply can't allow that. And frankly, I think that's been a bit of a convenient excuse for some governments. I think particularly this government says, well, you know, we want to work through the International Court of Justice and the ICC, but we can't because it's going to get vetoed by China. So by the way, let's just carry on doing trade deals with China. Let's not take any action on Magnitsky sanctions. Let's not actually push anything forward because we've always got this excuse to fall back on, that we've got paralysis in the international institutions. That's what has to change. And that's why we're such strong supporters, and Emily and her team have been doing such a fantastic job in backing the genocide amendment, because that actually is saying the British courts are going to take back control. And, you know, that is an argument that has been made by many on the other side of the house. And then now sometimes it's not convenient for them to take back control. Well, sorry, we have to take a moral leadership position on this, allow our courts, our judges to take this view on genocide. And the government's position has always been that this determining genocide is a matter for judges. Well, okay, if we can't get the international judges to do it, let's get the British judges to do it.
And actually, just so that people know, just so that we get the latest update, I mean, the trade bill has been a bill that has been fought hand-to-hand combat for the last sort of 3-4 years. And the essential problem is this, twofold. One is that we think trade bills don't come along every day. For the first time in 50 years, Britain has to develop its own trade policy, and the way to do that is by gathering in our collective knowledge and our collective experience and wisdom, and that Whitehall doesn't know best, and that we should have some form of parliamentary accountability for any trade deals that we do, and that we should have certain standards, and those standards should not be fallen behind. And the government simply don't agree to any of that. They don't agree to there being basic standards, and they don't agree to any sort of scrutiny. They want to be able to sign off trade deals on behalf of Her Majesty, and for there to be no further accountability at all. You know, and the ridiculous thing is that actually we're quite often, if we talk about, you know, Australia or wherever, many of these countries have a parliamentary democracy mirrored on what our original ideas were, but they have moved on. And with trade policy have injected some democracy into their trade policy, but we want to stay in the 1950s. And when it comes to taking back control, it is just the executive, it's just the Prime Minister and his close friends who want to have control. They do not want Parliament to have control, and they certainly don't want the public to have control, so that they can sign trade deals with whoever they want in whatever circumstances, so that it's even Conservative MPs who are now saying, hang on, does that really mean that you can sign up a trade deal with a country that is guilty of genocide? And the answer is, well, yeah, that's what we can do. Not that we will, of course. And so we have then said, well, hang on a minute. In any event, genocide can't be decided by anyone other than the courts. The international courts are paralyzed, therefore let's do it through a domestic court. The government says they don't like that. And in fact, they played all sorts of kind of hanky-panky in Parliament last time it came up, pushing motions together and messing things about and so on. And obviously the bottom line is they have a majority of 80 in the House of Commons. So we have to be, as has been suggested, as creative as possible. So on Monday, we've said to them, well, you don't like courts making decisions. You've talked it's a constitutional crisis. The courts shouldn't decide on genocide. Okay, how about we set up a committee of Parliament? It's just that they're going to be retired Supreme Court judges who are in the House of Lords who can make a decision. That's not a court, but at least they are a committee of people who are lawyers. And the government will say, that's a constitutional outrage. We can't possibly agree to it. And we say, you can't have it both ways. You either want to have a court or you want to have a committee. You've said you want a committee. We say, let's have a committee of judges, and they will not. I bet my bottom dollar, they will not compromise on this. They will continue to rely on their 80-seat majority. And why? Because they don't want to be accountable, and because we have seen a pattern of behavior in relation to the Conservatives when it comes to the Chinese. You know, we have seen, Theresa May going over to China and the Chinese press praising her for not criticizing them openly about human rights, which Osborne had done before. It's a pattern of behavior, and they want to have the freedom to be able to maneuver in whatever way they want. And they keep talking about CPTPP, but I tell you what, if we sign up to CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal in relation to the Pacific, the Chinese have said they want to join that too. So we may well end up in a multilateral agreement with the Chinese. I mean, these are the things that they want to be able to have in their back pocket and do as they want without having to be accountable. And this is the fight that we're having. I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but I think it's probably important that people kind of get where we're about to go on Monday in relation to what's happening in Parliament and how we're fighting what we're doing and the reasoning behind it. I hope that's helpful.
May I just jump in there as well? There's something very important about Sir Bob Neill's amendment, which we've called campaigning for the genocide amendment, a wrecking amendment, because that's what it is. It's not aimed to do anything of any practical use. The wording of Sir Bob Neill's wrecking amendment is such that it wouldn't apply to China, whereas the amendment which has been put forward by multilaterally, that would actually apply to China to give a determination on genocide. And those who know about genocide and how it operates know how important that is. So don't be fooled by what they're putting forward. It is a wrecking amendment. It's used just to get rid of this issue, not to do any good at all.
But Michael, it's worse than that. It passed last time. So this has been going backwards and forwards. We continue to fight this out. Bob Neal's amendment passed because they used their 80-seat majority. Because as you probably saw on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, the Conservative MPs were complaining about the amount of bullying that was going on. They tied various, our better amendment, they tied up with another amendment so that they could get Bob Neal passed instead. But having passed that, the House of Lords have rejected it again, bless them, with massive majority of more than 100. And so it's coming back into the Commons again, because the Lords are saying, we don't agree, we insist that you look at this. And they've tried to compromise and they've tried to get closer to the government. And now the challenge for the government is, do you want to have something that will work, or do you just want to kick this out? Because if they continue to vote against it, they are now exposed as to what it is that their agenda really is.
Thank you very much. And hopefully new policies help to end this supply chain links to China, and also it's help to stop this crime against humanity is taking place. We are fortunate enough to have wide range of speakers from House of Parliaments to human rights activists and lawyers. Once again, thank you very much for participation in this important talk. And we would like to thank you again on behalf of CEFTUS, all the participation and all the attendees of this event. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.
Goodbye to everyone. Good night.